WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's 6 p.m. in Dakar and Freetown, 7 p.m. in Lagos. Good evening and welcome to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio Dakar, Senegal, worldwide at wadr.org and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR. Here are the top stories. Former Senegalese President Macky Sall returns home seeking Senegal's backing for his campaign to become the next UN chief. Banjul denounces destruction of Gambian military site by Senegalese forces, calls for restraint. African leaders and civil society call for reforms to curb growing influence of money politics.
The declarations called for the need to advocate for implementation of global and continental resolutions on combating and preventing corruption and political financing.
And Guinea-Bissau deepens a partnership with Russia in key sectors including food security.
It is in the spirit that we are here today to deepen and to diversify our partnership with the Russian Federation.
Please stay with us for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Abdullahi Hassan.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast. Former Senegalese President Macky Sall has returned to Dakar for the first time in more than 2 years since leaving office. Accompanied by Guinea-Bissau's former President Umaro Sissoco Embalo, Sall was greeted by supporters at the airport before heading to the presidential palace for talks with President Bassirou Diomaye Faye. The visit is aimed at securing Senegal's official endorsement for Sall's bid to become the next UN Secretary General. But the return has drawn mixed reactions. Civil society groups and families of victims of the 2021 to 2024 political unrest continue to demand accountability for the violence and oppose any government support for the former president's UN campaign. Meanwhile, tensions have emerged between the Gambia and Senegal after Banjul accused members of the Senegalese armed forces of demolishing part of the fence surrounding Gambian military installation at the Bullock border post in the West Coast region. In a statement issued on Friday, Gambian government spokesperson and presidential advisor on diaspora affairs, Ibrahima Sankare, described the incident as deeply provocative and totally unacceptable. Veronica Njai reports.
According to the government, the fence surrounding a Gambian armed forces facility was partially destroyed without prior consultations and outside the established military and diplomatic channels that have long guided cooperation between the two neighboring countries. Despite the strong language, Banjul says it is committed to resolving the matter peacefully. Authorities say formal diplomatic discussions with Senegal are already underway, while the issue will also be examined through the Joint Military Committee and other bilateral mechanisms. The Gambian government stressed that the security situation along the border remains calm and under control. It also commended the professionalism and restraint of the Gambian armed forces, saying their response helped prevent the situation from escalating. Authorities in Banjul have urged the Senegalese armed forces to exercise maximum restraint and to address any border-related concerns through the existing bilateral mechanisms, while respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of both countries. Banjul further noted that the Gambia and Senegal have enjoyed decades of close cooperation and recalled the recent commitment by President Adama Barrow and President Bassirou Diomaye Faye to strengthen collaboration in defense, security, trade, border management, and economic development.
Veronica Njai reporting there. Elsewhere, Sierra Leone says it is ready to host Sunday's ECOWAS Summit of Heads of State as regional foreign ministers meet in Freetown to address West Africa's growing security challenges. ECOWAS chairperson and Sierra Leone President Julius Maada Bio says all preparations are complete for the July 19th summit in Lungi after inspecting the International Conference Center venue of the summit. As Augustine Coley tells us, Sunday's summit is preceded by a series of discussions at the Mediation and Security Council.
Since Wednesday, ECOWAS foreign ministers have been holding what is widely seen as the final round of consultations before Sunday's summit of regional leaders. Their discussions have centered on West Africa's deteriorating security landscape, the activation of the ECOWAS standby force, humanitarian coordination, regional crisis response mechanisms, and the bloc's future relations with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger following their exit from ECOWAS. Opening the meeting, ECOWAS Commission President Omar Aliyu Touré urged member states to strengthen preventive diplomacy, reinforce mediation efforts, and move swiftly to operationalize the standby force. Sierra Leone's Foreign Minister Tumeti Musa Kabari affirmed his country's commitment to peace, security, and democratic governance. From Nigeria, Foreign Minister of State Sola Anikanolai called for a united regional response to terrorism, piracy, banditry, and other cross-border crimes. The minister's recommendations will now go before heads of state on Sunday, where security, ECOWAS reforms, and future engagement with the Alliance of Sahel states are expected to dominate the summit agenda.
Augustine Coley filed that report. Still in the Manu River Union, hundreds of Liberians marched through the streets of Monrovia today, Friday, in a major anti-drug protest demanding accountability over the reported $19.2 million cocaine investigation and action on worsening economic and governance challenges. The demonstration highlights growing public concern over transparency in the country's fight against drug trafficking and reflects increasing calls for government accountability. We'll bring you details in a subsequent bulletin.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Many thanks for staying with us. As a reminder, we stream live at wadr.org and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR. Now, Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, is considering a mock presidential election and a comprehensive audit of its electoral technology ahead of the 2027 general elections. The move is aimed at strengthening public confidence in the electoral process and preventing a repeat of the technical challenges that marred the 2023 presidential election. Our Abuja correspondent, Eugene Sasetu, has more.
INEC Chairman Professor Joash Amukwiton disclosed this while receiving the British High Commissioner to Nigeria, Richard Montgomery, at the Commission's headquarters in Abuja. According to the Commission, the proposed mock poll will test its electoral technology, logistics, and operational systems before the 2027 elections. INEC also says it is considering a comprehensive audit of all its electoral technology infrastructure to identify and address potential weaknesses, particularly those linked to the technical glitches experienced during the 2027 general elections. The Commission further expressed concern over the growing threat of disinformation and the misuse of artificial intelligence in elections, saying efforts are underway to safeguard the integrity of the electoral process. INEC says the proposed measures form part of broader reforms aimed at improving transparency, efficiency, and public trust ahead of the 2027 polls. The proposals are still under consideration by the Commission and are expected to complement other preparations as political activities gather momentum across the country. For WADR, Yechini Sasitu in Abuja.
For more on politics and governance, multi-stakeholders from across the continent are calling for urgent reforms to curb the growing influence of money in politics. The call is contained in the Accra Declaration on Regulating Political Financing to Advance Integrity in Africa, adopted at the end of a regional conference held this week in Accra, Ghana, and organized by the Open Society Foundation. The declaration urges the implementation of global and continental anti-corruption commitments. It also warns that elections are increasingly being driven by wealthy financiers rather than the will of the people, making elected leaders more accountable to their financial backers than to citizens. Mwende Mweke, the Associate Director for the Democratic Futures Program at OSIWA, explains the details of the declaration.
The declarations called for the need to advocate for implementation of global and continental resolutions on combating and preventing corruption and political finance globally. One of them is the United Nations resolution on combating and preventing corruption, and the other one is linked to implementing Article 10 of the AU Convention on preventing corruption at country level, which actually speaks to political financing. The second call to action was to ensure that we commit to an initiative, a grand initiative by the AU Advisory Board against corruption to develop a model law on political financing in Africa that will help member states implement Article 10 of the Convention, of the AU Convention in preventing corruption at country level. Thirdly, we also called for the need to establish and expand a community of practice, which is really a platform of multi-stakeholders from researchers, civil society, academics, policymakers, policy change makers, to really build this body of work and knowledge on a knowledge generation, including public information sharing around the issue of money politics and alternative solutions that we can come up with to address the issue.
Mwende Mweke, the Associate Director for the Democratic Futures Program at OSF, joins us much later in the news in the guest segment. For now, let's cross over to Benin, where the Ministry of Justice and Legislation is warning of a surge in attempted scams related to the presidential pardon process. In a press release, the authorities denounced individuals who, in exchange for large sums of money, promised to have prisoners added to a supposed list of beneficiaries of this clemency measure. More details with Christopher Aticho.
Benin's Ministry of Justice is warning the public about growing scam targeting families of prison inmates. Officials say fraudsters are posing as justice and senior government officials to convince relatives of detainees that they can secure a presidential pardon in exchange for money. According to the ministry, families hoping for the release of their loved ones are the main target of the scheme. The state stresses that a presidential pardon is a legal process governed strictly by law and cannot be obtained through a middleman or by making any payments. According to Benin's constitution, such a decision rests solely with the competent state authorities in accordance with existing legal procedures. The Ministry of Justice is urging citizens to remain vigilant and to report any suspected scam attempts to the relevant authorities. The statement warns that those behind the fraudulent schemes risk criminal prosecutions without providing details of any individual or group of people arrested by defrauding victims. Through the public alert, Beninese authorities say they aim to protect vulnerable families from criminal networks exploiting their distress, while safeguarding the integrity and credibility of the country's presidential pardon process.
A report filed in by our Cotonou correspondent Aziz Azamsule and voiced in our studios by Christopher Atichu. More on judicial matters, a proposal to reintroduce public tribunals into Ghana's justice system has sparked a sharp divide in Parliament. While the government says the reforms will speed up justice delivery and reduce the backlog of cases, the opposition argues the move risks reviving painful memories of the country's past tribunal system. For more on this, let's join Nadiri Titi.
The controversy centers on the Tribunal Bill 2026, which seeks to re-establish regional and district tribunals as part of Ghana's judiciary. Government says the tribunals are provided for under the 1992 Constitution, but have remained largely dormant for years. If approved, they are expected to complement existing courts, reduce the growing backlog of cases, and improve access to justice, particularly in specialized criminal matters. But during parliamentary debate, Minority Leader Alexander Apenyo-Marking strongly opposed the proposal, warning that the return of public tribunals could reopen memories of the politically charged tribunals of the 1980s, which critics say were associated with human rights abuses.
We have to be careful creating an analogous justice system. We know of what the tribunals did. The dark days of Ghana, we are revisiting it on Ghanaians in this democracy. No,
Attorney General and Minister for Justice, Dr. Dominic Ayine, rejected those concerns, insisting the proposed tribunals bear no resemblance to those of the past.
What we are simply doing is implementing 126 by creating a lower tribunal that will deal with criminal matters that have been specified in the bill, including those of illegal mining. We are simply amplifying what is provided for in the Constitution.
The tribunal bill has completed its first reading and is currently before Parliament's Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee and the Judiciary Committee for further scrutiny before lawmakers decide whether to approve the reforms. For WADR, Nadiri Teti, Accra.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, live worldwide at wadr.org and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Former Senegalese President Macky Sall returns home seeking Senegal's backing for his campaign to become the next UN chief. Banjul denounces destruction of Gambian military site by Senegalese forces and calls for restraint. African leaders and civil society call for reforms to curb growing influence of money politics. And still ahead in the news, Guinea-Bissau deepens partnership with Russia in key sectors including food security. We also have the guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
But it will not work right. But the people that is educated, that is capable of working, will go. Those that will leave here will be in less number to do business and earn something good. But then now the market is choked.
Bringing you the facts beyond the headlines from Monrovia, Liberia. This is Abraham Parker. Stay tuned to WADR 94.9 FM Dakar.
Russia has reaffirmed its support for efforts to restore relations between the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and several African countries. This announcement follows high-level talks in Moscow on Thursday. Russian Foreign Minister made the remarks after meeting with Guinea-Bissau's Foreign Minister Fatoumata Diaw. Details with Deborah Amour.
The discussions between Russia and Guinea-Bissau's foreign ministers focused on regional cooperation and broader international developments, including the growing shift toward a multipolar global order. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed the importance of respecting the principles of the United Nations Charter and every nation's right to determine its own path of development without external interference.
In this context, we, Russia, have firmly reaffirmed our support for any efforts to normalize relations between the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, as well as Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso on the other hand. And we believe that these same four countries should fully participate in the African Union.
Meanwhile, Guinea-Bissau's Foreign Minister Fatoumata Diaw welcomed the continued cooperation between the two countries. She described the talks as an opportunity to strengthen bilateral relations and discuss issues of mutual interest.
It is in the spirit that we are here today to deepen and to diversify our partnership with the Russian Federation. We see significant opportunities for that to take place in agriculture, in food security, in fisheries and blue economy, as well as higher education.
The meeting forms part of Russia's broader diplomatic engagement with African nations as it seeks to deepen political, economic and security ties across the continent.
Many thanks, Deborah Amour.
Politics,
Analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
Well, this evening, the guest interview segment is a focus on the Accra Declaration on regulating political financing to advance integrity in Africa. It was adopted at the end of a regional conference held this week in Accra, Ghana, and organized by the Open Society Foundation, OSF. Delegates at the event say elections are increasingly being driven by wealthy financiers rather than the will of the people, making elected officials more accountable to their financial backers than to citizens. Mendy Mweke, Associate Director for the Democratic Futures Program at OSF, explains the details of the declaration.
The rising costs of politics has really risen through the roof. As you have seen the world over, including on our continent, the cost of elections is rising. And that also means that the cost of voter buying, unfortunately, is also rising. So what that means is the cost of politics continues to rise. It distorts representation because not everybody, not every citizen or ordinary citizen that wants to participate in political processes like elections around issues and policies that affect the common citizenry has the kind of money that a small number of elites would have to be able to compete in electoral office or in public office. So this in turn means that representation is distorted and limited to a few elite groups who are able to mobilize resources from different places, including illicit financial flows. And it also excludes young people and women who may not have access to these resources or the amount of money that is required today to run for elections or compete for office.
This should also be a concern for the ordinary citizens, as you stated. But in furtherance to what you are saying, would you mind explaining why should citizens or the ordinary Africans care about who funds politicians' activities?
Yes, Africans should really care, and ordinary citizens, each and every ordinary citizen that participates and wants to participate and be represented in political processes in their countries need to care about who regulates and who funds politicians, because one, transparency is about democracy. It is one of the tenets of democracy. Two, it's also linked to accountability. Where is the money coming from? Who is using it? Where is it being used? How is it being used? And is it being used in the interests of people that are seeking development and services from their public officials? So knowing where this money comes from actually influences how politicians and governments are able to account for that money, because if it is public goods and services, they ought to be accounted for. That is a simple way of ensuring that transparency is part of the democratic process.
Considering the political landscape of Africa, is there enough political will across the continent to implement needed reforms in fighting money in politics?
I would want to start by saying, before I answer your question, by saying that political influence will be fueled by how strong our institutions are. So there's a give and take there. And I think political will should actually start from the very fact that a recent UN report stated that Africa loses approximately $90 billion annually to illicit financial flows. If that will not will political will to address money in politics, I'm not sure what will, because this actually touches on our sovereign fiscal wealth. If we have $90 million annually on the continent being lost to illicit financial flows where it could be targeted towards sustainable development, peace and security on the continent. So that in itself should wield political will to address the reform of political finance or money in politics in Africa.
Mwende Mweke, Associate Director for the Democratic Futures Program at Open Society Foundations, OSF. Ahead of Sunday's FIFA World Cup final between Spain and Argentina, an image has gone viral on social media. A baby Lamine Yamal in the arms of a young Lionel Messi during a UNICEF photo shoot in 2007. Since then, headlines such as "Blessed by God," "Touched by God," and "The Baptism of the Gods" have flooded the media. Earlier in the tournament, following Senegal's defeat to Norway, Sadio Mane also remarked that the gods of the stadium were not with us. So, why does football so often borrow the language of divinity? Imoridet has this explainer.
The use of such expressions is not new. Earlier in the tournament, after Senegal's defeat to Norway, Sadio Mane remarked that the gods of the stadium were not with us, in quote, adding to a long list of football references that invoke the language of gods, blessings, and destiny. The imagery gained even greater prominence in the 20th century when Leni Riefenstahl's acclaimed documentary, Olympia, which chronicled the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Today, describing Lionel Messi as a god of football or referring to a player as blessed by God is generally understood as a way of acknowledging extraordinary talent rather than making a literal religious statement. However, some scholars argue that these expressions reveal something deeper about the place of sport in modern society. French sports sociologist Jean-Marie Brum suggests that modern sport often functions like a secular religion. According to him, athletes become the gods, stadiums serve as temples, pre-match ceremonies and national anthems become rituals, and supporters take on the role of devoted followers. In this view, elite athletes are elevated beyond admiration to a level approaching veneration. Some religious leaders have also voiced concern over this growing use of sacred language in sports, arguing that it can blur the distinction between celebrating human achievement and attributing divine qualities to athletes. As football continues to inspire billions around the world, expressions such as God of football or blessed by God remain part of the sport's rich vocabulary. Yet behind these popular phrases lies a broader conversation about the cultural influence of sports and whether the world's greatest athletes have come to occupy an almost sacred place in contemporary society.
With more with that analysis, more on FIFA 2026, the halftime interval in Sunday's World Cup final between Spain and Argentina is set to last more than 15 minutes because of the installation required for the tournament's 11-minute halftime show. According to sources, the installation is expected to take about 7 minutes before the performance begins, extending the break beyond soccer's traditional 15-minute halftime interval. And that's it for sports. With that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudu Juf for the technical support. Do interact with us via social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok at WADR, and stream live at wadr.org. I am Abdullahi Hassan. Good evening.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Graft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.